Whoa, that's a big question. Anurag says, I have more than one question. I think there are three here. I've taken two. So I came across two statements. First, some Chinese sources have mentioned that Lalitaditya the Great was their vassal, the Tang Empire's vassal. Second is that some sources have mentioned that the Kshatriya Rajput ruler Bapar Rawal was a vassal of Lalitaditya Muktapida and fought against the Arabs on his behalf. I don't know how authentic these statements are. Could you throw some light on these remarks? So it is known that the Tang Empire claimed that Lalitaditya Muktapida was their vassal. That's what they claimed. Well, the Chinese claimed that everybody was their vassal and that they were the center of the universe. That's what they claimed. It doesn't mean it's facts. The Chinese, the Tang dynasty, the Tang Empire also called India Tianzhu, which means the center of heaven. And at that time, the greatest emperor in India was Lalitaditya Muktapida. He conquered most likely much of Central Asia and Sindh and much of India as well. So he had an enormous empire that would rival that of Kanishka the Great. So such an emperor would not be the vassal of the Tang. There certainly would have been diplomatic relations and so on. And maybe the Tang liked to embellish facts in their own historical records. It doesn't mean that these claims have any significant basis in reality. So the fact is that Lalitaditya was not anybody's vassal. He was a great emperor in his own right, and he had diplomatic relations with the Tang. So that's how it is. About Bappa Rawal, I am not quite sure. I haven't really studied the history of Bappa Rawal and his relationship with other kings and rulers. There is, in fact, a very significant paucity of information of literature about Bappa Rawal. So I am not quite sure about that. I know I don't have sufficient knowledge as of today about this. So maybe I can revisit this in the future. Okay, the next question is, during the period between the 3rd and the 6th century, there were three adjacent neighboring great powers: the Romans, the Sasanians, and the Guptas. Correct. While the Romans and the Sasanians were engaged in continuous large scale conflicts, contrary to it, there were no such problems between the Guptas and the Sasanians. Why is that? Please give me an answer. This is an interesting question. So, let's understand who the Sasanians were. The Sasanians were our Persian cousins. So the Sasanian empire was located in Iran, and they had this long-standing conflict going on with the Western nations, whether it is Greek, or whether it is Greece, or later on the Romans, because the Romans eventually conquered Greece, and therefore they came into conflict with the Persians. So during this period that you speak about, there was indeed this conflict between the Sasanians and the Romans. It was an ongoing conflict. It just went on and on. And it's curious, it's quite curious that there was no significant conflict at any period in time between India and Persia, whether it is during the Hakshamanish Empire, Achaemenid Empire, or the Sasanian period or whatever, right? It's only after the Islamization of Iran that the relations deteriorated between India and Iran, and you had conflicts later on. So I am not quite sure why it is the case. Maybe it is this cultural and ethnic affinity that India and Persia had in the old days that prevented any such escalation, or any such incident or conflict. Because it's true, the Persians always concentrated on expanding westwards and entering into conflict with Western cultures, the Greeks and the Romans. They never ever had any significant conflict with Indians, ever. It is known that Darius claimed that he had some part of Western India as part of his empire. So that would probably be parts of Balochistan or some parts of Afghanistan, because Afghanistan, Gandhar, has historically always been part of India and so on. But there was never any conflict between India and Iran on any substantial scale. So I don't know why. I don't think any historian has even tried to answer that. The same way no historian tried to answer why Genghis Khan never tried to invade India. He decided not to invade India. So maybe that's something I should give some thought to and figure out why, before the Islamization of Persia, the Persians never tried to invade India or enter into any kind of conflict with India, because India was not always unified under a great empire. We had these imperial phases, the Mauryans, the Kushans, even the Scythians at some point in time, Indo-Scythians, and then you had the Mahakshatrapas and all, then you had the Guptas and so on and so forth. But there were times when India was not unified under a single empire, and even in those during those periods, the Persians did not attempt ever to invade India or enter into a conflict. So that's a curious fact, historical fact. So Anurag, thank you for asking this question. It is something I need to think more about, and maybe I will make a video about that in the future.